Hi, I'm Payton Doherty, and I'm in 12th grade.
Hi, I'm Sydnie Oakleaf. I'm also in 12th grade.
Hi, I'm Ryan Yelichek, and I'm in 10th grade.
Hi, I'm Brennen Bratticher, and I'm in 11th grade.
And this
is
the RawCast.
1-0, and liftoff.
Today we're going to be talking about the space race between the United States and Russia and the dogs that they sent to space during this race. So, Ryan, to start, can you tell us a little about the space race?
The space race was originally intended for the arms race for the ballistic missile testing following the Cuban Missile Crisis. It then turned into sending a satellite into orbit to study the Earth's geophysical year. The Russians then launched the first satellite into orbit, the Sputnik 1, where it lasted for around 3 months before falling back to the Earth. Then, fearing Soviet spying, the U.S. started to launch their own satellites into orbit as well. Do you think that it was justified for the United States to enter the space race?
Well, you see, the United States thought that Russia was spying on them, and because of the Cold War, they decided to enter the space race. So the United States and Russia space race was really started just because the United States and Russia were competing for a lot of things in the 1960s. So the United States started to launch living things into space, as well as Russia, to test their flights so that one of the countries, either the United States or Russia, could be the first to either land on the moon or orbit Earth with a living thing. What were the living things that they used in space?
Yeah, I mean, obviously dogs, but, they sent other stuff, too. They sent a jellyfish into space.
That's crazy, because, humans are nothing like jellyfish at all.
If I had a time machine, the first thing I'd do was go back in time and, talk to the dude that sent a literal jellyfish to space.
That really just shows, the real need for the United States and Russia to get into space faster than the other, to maintain, their hegemony over the rest of the world, which is, really bad.
And then finally, people actually went to space, starting with a Soviet man named Yuri Gagarin.
The United States followed by sending Alan Shepard aboard the Mercury Redstone rocket, and then later in July 16th, 1969, they sent the Apollo 11, the most famous NASA mission to the moon, with Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins to the moon and back safely.
This ended the supposed space race, making the United States the winner, but there are still some drastic political and inhumane effects for the space race today.
It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, though. 17 total dogs died in space, 2 of which were named Dzik and Lisa. Dzik and Lisa both could have survived their trip into space, but their parachutes on the ship re-entering the atmosphere failed, and so they died on impact.
Wait, so some of those animals died. That makes it even worse. And even after the first couple died, they still continued sending them into space, didn't they?
Yeah, Leica's body's actually still in space.
Really?
She's still orbiting us right now because the ship they made wasn't made to come back. So she's still just up there floating around.
For more background information, Leica was a stray mongrel from the streets of Moscow that was selected to go into space on the Sputnik 2 that was launched into space on November 3rd, 1957. Leica was a Siberian Husky Terrier mix for all you dog lovers out there, and she was the first dog that was entered to go to space. The Soviet Union accounted that they implied that the dog was alive for 6 to 7 days into the mission, and they put poisoned food on the ship just in case her oxygen supply ran out. But she actually died 103 minutes into orbit. The USSR knew that she died while in orbit, but they told the entire world that she died a few days later. Leica has become an icon for the inhumane practices for all animals during the space race, as she was the first living thing to be sent into space. But she also paved the path for Soviet Russia and the United States to send more dogs, as Brennen pointed out, as well as monkeys, birds, and even a jellyfish. And while Leica did die a tragic death, there were some good and bad effects for Leica's journey. Her legacy is now broadcasting the inhumane practices for the space race. The United States won the space race by landing on the moon because of what Leica did and her sacrifice for space exploration.
And it wasn't a quick death either, right? She slowly overheated to death.
Oh,
That's kind of crazy to me. Not only were we sending animals to space and just letting them die, but we were letting them die slowly and very painfully. That's pretty wrong, I think.
Like I said, it was 103 minutes, which is a little over an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. Literally, she was orbiting and slowly dying the entire time. Once she exited the ozone layer, she started to overheat. It was a tight ship that she wasn't even big enough to fit in. They only had like poisoned food on there so that in case she did survive the orbit, she would then euthanize herself. The worst part is that up until her flight on November 3rd of that year, she was being confined in smaller and smaller cages to make sure that she could fit in the smallest possible ship, so they didn't have to spend the money on like a huge rocket ship for her. Suffered way before she even went into space. After Laika, they started using more humane ships for them.
What would you classify as more humane ships?
Okay, so these more humane ships weren't confining them. Like, Laika had about a foot of space around her. Like, she couldn't move while she was in orbit. She had to just stay where she was seated. I mean, if you look at rocket ships today, like, astronauts can walk around the ship. There's bathrooms on rocket ships today. But Laika had absolutely no room to move while she was in orbit.
Because even the way they train these dogs to go into space, like, they would just put the dogs in boxes for, like, extended periods of time so that the dogs could get used to not having room to move around. They had these rocket ships that could not fit a dog, and they knew it was wrong, so they trained the dog to be able to withstand this small space. So it's not even like they were accidentally sending these dogs to space and accidentally killing them. They were planning for these dogs to die, which makes it almost worse.
Yeah, and it's not just Russia that did this, the United States also did. But the United States was a little more upfront about what they were doing. Russia decided to try and hide Laika's death for decades after what happened. But now her 60th anniversary was a few years ago, so the whole story has finally come out, thanks to more modern technology and history. But both the United States and Russia definitely knew what they were doing was intentionally wrong, but for the sake of their own political hegemony, they decided to do it anyways.
In the past, they sent these dogs to space and the dogs died. They still send animals to space. Despite whether or not the conditions are the same, do you guys think it's okay that we still send animals to space?
I had no idea. We still send animals to space.
Yeah, on a smaller scale. I don't know that we send dogs anymore, but we send like thousands of fruit flies to space every year and study their anatomy.
And it's not the same as sending dogs to space at all. But it is just strange to see how far we've come in terms of we used to send dogs and other animals that are really susceptible to pain and death in space. We've moved from that to using animals that are less affected by space. And I think that that's a really good improvement. You may be thinking that you don't really care about the dogs that died in space because it was in the past and it has changed. I'm here with
Delaney McNichol.
And Nikki Springer.
And today we're going to be talking about specific cases where when the animals went to space, they never came back.
So sad.
Delaney, how would you feel if that happened to your dog?
I would be miserable.
And do you guys think it's important that we stop animal testing?
Yes.
Yes.
Why do you think that it's important that we stop animal testing?
It's horrible for the animals.
Because if it doesn't work, you're hurting them.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the RawCast.